Hello and welcome back to the West Ham Breakdown podcast with Analytics United and my friend Darcy Cox. The transfer window opened again yesterday, which sounds like a weird thing to say. I think it was open for 6 days or something like that, and then closed and then opened again. So who knows? But I'm led to believe it's open until the 1st of September now, which means we've got a whole summer of rumours, no doubt. Lots of scouting work from us, which you can find here, but also on our Patreon at patreon.com/Analytics United, where we have already started a lot of our transfer content. I think a nice video went up this week, I think, about links to Rafael Onyedika, Matthias Kvistgarden, and we'll be keeping on top of that every week here on until the window closes. Darcy, little icebreaker. Who is the player that we've been linked to that you are most excited about so far?
Are we if we're counting like tenuous links, probably Jhon Durán. I know it's really boring.
Also really topical though. It's only today that it was announced.
Again, really boring, but I'd say the one that I actually think is the best fit is someone like Shea Charles. I think he would just come in and work really, really well. Obviously not the most exciting player. It's basically a fairly technical workhorse, but yeah, it's also someone that will be talked about in some upcoming transfer content as well, which will be on the Patreon. So many reasons to go and check it out.
Exactly that. And I suppose second question, Jhon Durán is obviously the exciting player. Profile-wise, does he fit?
I think it's quite hard to say, because I would say that I'm not 100% set on what we want out of a Potter striker. I wouldn't say it's necessarily clear or emergent either from anything that Potter has done. Because we've been playing a 5-3-2.
True.
So are we looking for someone that can play in that too, and would work well in the two, or are we looking for someone to lead the line on their own? I would kind of assume the latter, and therefore I think Durán would be a decent fit because we're looking for someone obviously that, you know, you don't want the finishing to be a problem, but really we're looking for someone that's actually quite good at being sort of not a target man, but almost like a bounce board, so someone you can access to feet. Is happy to drop deep, but doesn't overcomplicate it, and then is still good around the box as well, which Durán has shown to a certain extent. I think a lot of the time his sort of out of this world level of finishing or him scoring from 40 yards has kind of taken away from the rest of his profile, but he's a well-rounded footballer, and I think he would do the kind of things that Potter I think Potter would want anyway. I think he would do them quite well. Not sure if he's the perfect fit, and I have to say a part of that is because I'm not exactly sure what the perfect fit is just yet.
Yeah, well, we'll be doing a lot of work to work out what that is over the summer, and if you want more profiles on players like that, you know where to find them, as we just said. But the reason I asked is because many of you will have listened last week when we discussed the sort of profiles of players that Graham Potter will want going into this squad. Not necessarily positions, because as Darcy says, we don't necessarily know what formation we're likely to play, and I think it's incredibly unlikely we're going to be wedded to one formation throughout the course of the season, given who our manager is heading into it. But what we do know is that there are certain profiles that we definitely want. We want midfielders that can eat up ground at a better rate than our current crop. We want wing-backs or full-backs that can contribute in the final third more so than our current crop. And as you say, across the board, we want technically secure, ball-comfortable players, ideally with a little bit of press resistance and the ability to help us get forward. And today, what we're going to be doing in the podcast is looking at the number of players that have been out on loan over the course of the season, whether that's more established senior players in their own right, like Nayef Aguerd and Maxwel, Cornet, or some of the emerging talents like Earthy, Freddie Potts and Callum Marshall, who everyone has been keen to see integrated into the first team squad. And we're going to have a look at what they've achieved over the course of the season, whether they're a good profile fit for Potter's system, and whether we think the next step should be first team involvement, or whether perhaps a loan move or even a transfer away from the club is the best next step for us, but also for their career. And I suppose as good a place as any to start off is probably the most valuable of all our loanees this season. I think it's fair to say, based on the quality of the player, but also on the quality of the season that they've had. And that's Nayef Aguerd, who's been out on loan at Real Sociedad. La Real, is it? Is that what they go by? Is that what they prefer to be called? And frankly, he's had a pretty solid season. I think, I haven't done a bit of reading on him. I think his back end of the season tailed off a bit. It seems like La Real fans sort of were less bothered by him towards the end of the season. I think in part maybe because of fitness concerns as well. But at January, talks were, like rumours were suggesting that Real Madrid were looking at him because of the level that he'd been playing at. And like on a surface level, profile-wise, he is kind of attractive centre-back, right? He's like left-footed, tall, pretty quick, handsome, maybe. And that's the sort of profile that many clubs are looking for, particularly if they want someone to model the home kit. It's very important to be handsome. But Darcy, what do you think about Nayef Aguerd? I must admit myself, when he arrived, I was very excited because I thought, this is it. This is the step in the right direction. And at Premier League level, it never really clicked. But he's gone away and shown, actually, no, there really is a player in here, I promise. Is that player likely to play for West Ham next season?
Yeah, I think when you look in the data, so you know, if we kind of set out the what we're looking for essentially is a player that is, or a centre back that is left side biased, probably left footed, right? Is comfortable on the ball, defends well in wide areas, and you look at Nayef Aguerd's data, so like in the top 9% of centre backs for his ground duel percentage. In the top 5% for his attempted progressive carries as well. And you're like, well, isn't this the kind of guy that we would be targeting? All his dueling data has looked really good across the season. All his progressive stuff has maintained and looked better than it did at West Ham. And I mean, of course, the team that he played in at West Ham wasn't necessarily trying to get that out of him to much extent. But it's probably worth kind of balancing it with how him being, and it's going to sound like I'm saying it's his fault, but Sociedad's season has it has been their worst in recent memory. I think they're comfortably a top 10 La Liga team, and I don't think they failed to finish outside the top 10 in the Liga for quite a while, until this season. So as much as his individual data looks good, Sociedad haven't had a good season. I think a lot of that has been defensively focused. I have to be honest, I haven't watched a massive amount of them, so I'm not 100% sure what the issue has been. Doesn't mean that I don't think that profile-wise, at least in theoretically, with the attributes that Aguerd has, why would we not try and keep him, right? We're lacking a left-sided centre-back. I think the only reason not to is if for some reason you get really, really good offer from somewhere else. So I don't see why else you'd move on someone that's a really good fit. So yeah, I think for me, he's someone I would really want to retain, particularly, and I guess a lot of emphasis goes into if we're playing a back five. So and in particular, I'd want to keep him if we were going to use three centre backs. I think that left-sided centre back role would be his.
Yeah, I can see that. I think the only things I would add that potentially challenge that somewhat are the only other reason you'd look to move them on is if a player doesn't want to be here, right? And if the reporting is true, then it sounds like he's leveraging for a move away from the club and isn't really keen to even come back for pre-season. So if that is to be believed, then yeah, fair. You probably start looking for where the market opportunities are. It does seem that there is interest, whether that's from Bayer Leverkusen. I think I've seen some links to Atletico Madrid as well, and Olympique Marseille. So big clubs, all I would assume have some level of European football. I think they probably all have Champions League football next season, to be honest. So again, it becomes a difficult conversation to convince someone who's had a good season on the continent with offers on the table from Champions League clubs. Becomes difficult to convince them to stay at West Ham, which I think is fair enough. And also I think when you've got the amount of work that needs to be done that we do, and you've got someone who has a little bit of value that you could potentially use to fund some moves in the transfer market, probably also makes sense. That said, I am inclined to agree with you when I think about the profile of player and the system and the fit. I think, as you say, on that left-sided centre-back position, he's a great player to have, and not even necessarily it doesn't have to be as a starter necessarily, because I think you're probably going to have to invest at centre-back for some reason. Most likely is a starting left-sided centre-back. You potentially have to invest in another one depending on what happens with Mavropanos. And then that gives you the option of Todibo starting right-sided centre-back, Kilman starting in the middle, and then someone ahead of Aguerd at left-sided centre-back, which in turn could result in a sort of uptick in performance from him in a West Ham shirt if he's being challenged by someone ahead of him. But yeah, I think, to be honest, if you can get one of the interested clubs to give you 25 million for him, then I probably would take that, because I think you could reinvest that better. I think you could find someone who is potentially a better fit or slightly younger than Aguerd for this system. And certainly if you're already intending to sort of really bolster that defensive back line by bringing in a starter ahead of them regardless, you just use that money to speed up that process. But yeah, I would say the best loanee we've had out this season, certainly in terms of what we'd be able to bring in for them. The only other player sort of that could be knocking on the door in terms of that squad place, let's say he's not a starter, but a centre-back who could compete for minutes sort of on the periphery, is Kaelan Casey, who much is thought of at the club from everything we're led to believe. Fans, obviously, as we always are, sort of pining for them to get minutes because we want that integration from the academy into the first team. Probably somewhat disappointingly, we've not seen as much of Casey as we would like to. I think there's probably been some opportunities where we could have brought him on and haven't, but equally we've not had the best of seasons, and quite often we've been trying to stay in games or pull it back. And I think when you've got the likes of Mavropanos or Todibo, depending on who starts on the bench, you are, if you're not in a positive situation, more likely to reach for the senior player, unless you're like 5-0 down and you just go, sod it, let's chuck on the youth. But it's rare that we were ever in a blowout. So I kind of get it. I'll kick off with this one. I think for me, when I look at how West Ham tend to manage their youth prospects anyway, unless they're like Declan Rice levels, but also in terms of what I think Casey needs next for his development, I would be looking at getting him a decent loan out, either at a solid League One club or a Championship club, but ideally a club who has a manager that plays with 3 centre-backs, thinking long-term, just because I think if Potter's going to stay around and be a project manager for us and has committed to using youth where possible, then a loan to a system that is not dissimilar to how Graham Potter will want to then use him if he comes back from that loan and has been good and shown that he can compete, then that's only going to serve him the world of good, right? But I just think in terms of having not played really much at all senior level football, I think going out and getting those minutes defending against senior players is invaluable, particularly for centre-backs as well. I think if you're a really talented striker or a really talented midfielder, you can probably step up to the Prem, but I think centre-back, when you're trying to man-mark Erling Haaland on your Premier League debut season or stuff like that, it's quite a serious leap up from PL2, where, Darcy, you've got some of the data for that, and all of what I've just said I stand by, but his data actually is pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah. There's who's crack there? What nice.
Getting emotional talking about the academy prospects.
The way he wins that ball back. It's there's sort of a there's some really big highlights. So his dueling data is really good. At least in his win rates, he definitely reads in the data as more of a sort of reserved, passive centre back. as the amount of duels that he flies into, his duel volume rate is actually quite low down. He's in the 22nd percentile in PL2. But he wins not all of the duels that he goes into, but a very good amount of the duels he goes into. So based on this, I'm kind of reading him more as like a centre back, although his ground dueling is of a high level. I think what's missing with Casey at the minute is the on the ball stuff. So he's not necessarily the most reliable passer across any distance. He's not unreliable, but he's not always the most accurate. But really, there's no progression with him. He's not a particularly mobile on the ball profile. He doesn't carry the ball forward that often. Doesn't attempt to progress the ball via pass very often either. And I agree. I think a loan could be helpful. I just think it's also... I don't think it's necessarily clear exactly which of the roles in the three he would play, whether he would be a wide centre-back or a centre-back. And the kind of loan that you're talking about would help us solve that problem whilst helping him develop. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that.
Yeah, and I think that's a crucial bit that you've landed on there at the end is like... Some would think, oh, well, why not just... surely he'd be okay on loan at a back four club, which is it would be good. He's still getting senior minutes at centre-back, but you don't then have the option to test him in both roles, if that makes sense. Like, he's just a centre-back in a back four, and you won't know how he handles those sort of more... defending in those wide areas against wingers once the wing backs have been breached and he's the last line of defence in those wide areas. That just doesn't really happen much in a back four system. Whereas if you send him to a manager who is using three centre backs, he's probably more likely to get more minutes because there's three centre backs that are starting instead of two, and therefore the minutes are likely to be more spread. And then also, the manager has the freedom to play him as a central centre-back and as a wide centre-back and sort of work out where his best position is for us throughout the course of the season. And then he'll come back with that sort of under his belt and we'll go, okay, well, it's clear that against this opposition, you performed best in this role and X, Y, Z. So I think it would be great for his development, but also in terms of our assessment of what his future is. I do think from what I've seen... he does have a future as a West Ham player, so which is why I'm keen to send him on loan and assess that ourselves. Whether I think he'll be sort of first team Premier League starter in the next few years, I'm still sort of jury's out on that for the reasons that you've said. But also just because I've not seen him tested enough against really physical strikers. Obviously, he's been really impressive at youth level, but you're not really coming up against fully developed 6'4", 6'5" strikers at that level. There's a very rare handful of them, but even then they're often quite slight. So yeah, I think next step for Casey is go away, have a good loan deal at a club that suits us at a reasonable level. I think it has to be Championship. I think a League One team that's competing at towards like playoffs is fine, and then come back next summer and we suss it out. Few others, ones to watch, I guess. One is Luizão, who he's, for those of you that don't know, has been on loan in Poland. I think he's played just over 300 minutes. Again, impossible to say really, isn't it? But I think given his age, I think he's like getting towards 23 now, I think. And the fact he's not been able to break into that first team really at all under 3 different managers now, probably is enough to suggest that it's just not really going to work for him here. Then there's Golambeckis, who has been performing above his age level in the academy. I think for me, I'd be keen to just sort of see him stick it out for another season, playing above his age level and see how he gets on there, and then potentially move him on loan. That is next season once he's like got a reasonable amount of under 21s minutes at PL2 level. And then there's Finlay Herrick, also obviously in the defensive department, but a goalkeeper. People will be looking at the goalkeeping situation at the club at the minute and being like, well, Fabianski's gone, can he not step into that role? I'm sure he could. That would be possible. But I think for him, finding him a club where he can be the number one, and again, just get that experience playing competitive senior football is way more beneficial than being sort of third choice goalie, where your minutes are going to be extremely limited anyway, and you're just going to be playing for the under 21s. So I think of those 3, it's Luizão, cut your losses, Golambeckis, stay in the academy, and Herrick, go out on loan. Any disagreements?
Yeah. I think Herrick and Golambeckis are more ones like, like they're essentially the next guys coming in behind, like a Kaelan Casey, or obviously with Finlay Herrick, there's not really like a young option there right now that he's stepping into the place of. But yeah, I think Luizão, my thinking is the exact same as yours. It's 3 managers that he's failed to make an impact for, or move in a way where they include him in squads even. So yeah, I think it's probably time to get some money for him if we can get some money, despite his, I guess, overstated FM reputation, which actually makes him look like quite a handy centre back.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? He's always a nice one to sort of, sell straight away, really.
You get good
maybe
money.
get 4 or 5 mil for him and go and buy some youngster. That'll do for section 1. When we come back, we'll be discussing 4 midfielders that have been out on loan. And to those of you listening, I will be impressed if you can name all 4 within, let's say, 10 seconds. Let us know how you get on. Okay, welcome back. For those of you that took part in my little interactive game, I'm sorry, because only 3 of them have been on loan. So a little trick question for you there. Obviously, Lewis Orford's been at the club. Brain fart, what can I say? But before we get into those players, a quick recap for those of you that may have forgotten or didn't get a chance to listen to our profiling video last week. The sort of profile that we're looking for as a midfielder as we move into this next season, mainly based out of the fact that we haven't seen enough of it this season, but also with an eye to what we expect Potter will want. But as I say, mainly to address weaknesses that have come to the fore this season with our current crop of midfielders. We want better ground coverage. We want players that are going to contest in a lot of duels, particularly if we're going to see a sort of 2-man midfield. We would assume. I think I'm looking at a 3-4-3, 5-2-3 type situation, rather than the 3 central midfielders that we've seen a lot of this season. So you need basically midfielders that are able to do all 3 of those players' work collectively as a pair. So duel-hungry ground coverers, ideally with a good level of ball security so that we can sort of keep things ticking over in the middle, and at least one of them a progressor, because I don't think both of them need to be super progressive. I think we talked a lot when we did the profiling video about balance of the midfield. You can have sort of one guy that really excels at the ground coverage and dual contesting, but is just secure on the ball, and then another one that does slightly less of the defensive work, but is ready to receive that ball off of the dual dominator so that he can do the progressive stuff. So let's kick off with Orford then. Why not? He's the one that's been in the club, and he's the one that everyone seems to think very highly of. Again, not dissimilar to Casey. I kind of wish we'd seen more of Orford this season. Probably feel more strongly about that in Orford's case than I do with Casey, because I think with Casey there has been players ahead of him. I think bringing on Cresswell as a left centre-back towards the back end of the season was a logical move, and it worked. You've got Mavropanos and Todibo competing for 2 of those centre-back slots, with Kilman being the nailed-on starter. So bringing them in makes sense when they're paid what they are and when they're as good as they are. And therefore, Casey was never really going to get a look in. You don't really have that sort of cover with midfield, because I think so often all of the issues that we were trying to rectify in-game from the bench were midfield problems, but we were constantly bringing the same midfielders in and hoping that it would all of a sudden work, and the weaknesses were still there to see week in, week out. And in Lewis Orford, we've got probably the most excitement about a midfielder since Rice came through the academy, I would say, and a player who, as we've just been discussing, is, at least from what I've watched of him, incredibly ball secure, and a really, really good high volume progressor, as well as, primarily through passes, but also through carries too. So I think the major frustration there is that in saying what he's good at, I'm kind of like, hang on, didn't we need a lot of that this season? And I suppose the issue is, how does that scale up from PL2 to Premier League? But my retort would be, well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to give the lad some minutes. So, a bit of a frustration, but I suppose it begs the question, really, of what is the plan for him next season? Because do you just keep him around and promise him more minutes, or do you send him somewhere where he's probably going to be the best midfielder at the club, and hope that really sort of brings him on leaps and bounds and makes the case for him sort of knocking on the door of that midfield?
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult with Orford because, well, I mean, he's quite easily been the PL2 team's best player, right? He's usually the best player on the pitch, or one of the best players on the pitch.
Yeah.
And I think it means that his data is definitely useful, but I think it's slightly less useful because what you're seeing him pop out for is things like shot generation, so XA and XG. He's in the top 5 percentile of PL2 midfielders. Same for shots created as well. So he's someone that's actually offering a lot to the attack at that level. Like you said, really secure on the ball. Is playing a lot of passes and completing most of them. And that kind of volume of pass, I think, is really important. It's someone that's truly ball comfortable, not that plays, an under average amount of passes, but is accurate with all of them. And then is one of the best progressors at that level as well. The thing that I guess maybe explains why we haven't seen as much of him at PL level is that his out of possession work in the data is not really very eye-catching. He's not flying into many duels. He's decent in the air, but particularly on the ground, he's not winning many of his duels, and he's certainly in the air and on the ground not flying into many duels, which I find quite surprising because the games I've caught of him this season, he is very much an all-action midfielder. He is everywhere, and that comes through with things like his dribbling forward with the ball, like you said. He is someone that's able to be mobile and explosive. And for that reason, I would quite like to see him go on loan. I think we need to see him not be outright the best player on his team, and therefore try and do a bit of everything. Try and be in the opposition box as much as possible and score goals. I think we really need to see the kind of midfielder that Lewis Orford is. And then if he is that type of midfielder, if he's sort of a box crasher, essentially the yardstick he's being measured by is Thomas Souček, and that's a very difficult one to compete against. So yeah, I would also be a fan of a loan, because I mean it's a player with a lot of potential, and whether he fits into the role that we're looking for or not, one, I think is hard to tell from his PL2 season, and two, if he doesn't fit, it's someone that we could still generate a decent fee for. So a loan makes complete sense, I think, for Orford.
Yeah, I think I would be straight on the phone to Portsmouth and say, hey, I know we just took Freddie Potts off you, but do you fancy another midfielder who can come in and test himself in a club that's just looked after one of our midfielders, and sort of, made a case for his inclusion in the squad next season, which is an accidental but quite nice segue into a discussion about Freddie Potts and what he can offer. This one's a tricky one for me because he's obviously done really well on both his loans, right? He's done really well at Wycombe. The Wycombe fans loved him. He's gone on to do really well at Portsmouth. The Portsmouth fans love him. The Portsmouth manager, Jhon Senior, who I used to watch a lot as a kid because I had a Stevenage season ticket when I was a child and he was there. So it was fun when I saw him become a manager. Felt very football manager. But he's spoken sort of publicly about how he doesn't expect to have Freddie Potts next season, how he would love him to come back, but he thinks that he's outgrown them essentially and is ready to contribute at Premier League level, which speaks volumes, to be honest. I think that's quite telling of the performances that he was putting in. The flip side of that is that if that is how a championship manager is speaking about you, and that's the level of performance you've put in at the championship level, you could probably generate a reasonable amount of income in a summer where we've got a lot of work to do by selling him to a established or competing championship side. So that is where the dilemma lies. I'm like, is it worth more to me to have Freddie Potts in and around the squad when we're going to be doing so much surgery to the midfield anyway, hopefully, and therefore his prospects for starting are probably reduced anyway, because if you're going to spend that amount of money bringing in a couple of midfielders, they're always going to be ahead of him. unless he comes in and proves that he is the guy to fix the midfield. But then I just don't know that he is of the level that I would want to be going out and spending money on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then you're just like, okay, is it cut your losses time, really? Because do you sell him at his high? Because presumably if he does stick around for a season and he doesn't feature much and then we let him go anyway, his value is reduced from what it is now because this is the best he's ever played. So it's a really difficult debate, and one that probably not many West Ham fans want to hear us have, because I think you always want to have those academy players in and around the squad. But I think, like I say, when the time has come, his time has come at the wrong time, really, almost, because if it was a season where our midfield two were fixed and he was ready to come in and be the sub and the backup and try and knock them off their perch, then that's great. But if we're going to try and get rid of basically every midfielder we've got, to some extent, that's what we've been led to believe, that everyone's available, then I think anyone you bring in probably goes ahead of him in the pecking order, just because you're spending money on them and you're not spending money on him. So it's really, really difficult. It is really difficult. And I think if we were in Europe, this would really change, because I think there's a massive value to having someone that has come through your academy, because it's essentially an extra squad place, right? But we don't have Europe, so that's not as much of a consideration. The only thing we really need to consider is whether they're homegrown in the country's academy system, which you can do elsewhere. Josh Brownhill, for example, would fill that. And then is Josh Brownhill more valuable to the squad than Freddie Potts? There's a big question mark there with regards to squad planning. So yeah, it's a really, really difficult one for me, and one that I'm still not sure I have landed on an answer to. I'd keep him around as a fifth choice centre mid, but at that point I kind of feel like I'm screwing him over, because I think he could go and be a starter in a championship, and then I'm just kind of delaying his career. Ultimately, I think I'd probably sit down with him and be like, look mate, here's the situation, what do you want to do, and we'll help you out. I don't know, what do you think, Darcy?
I agree that it's a difficult one. For me, he's probably, out of everyone on this list, he's the one that I most want to see in pre-season. Because
Nice.
when you look in the data, he is sort of like the flip side to Orford. So Orford's goal contribution is really, really good. His level of progression is really, really strong. And he seems really secure on the ball as well in the data. But his dueling data is basically nowhere. With Freddie Potts, everything is sort of around the average when it comes to on the ball stuff. He's not the most reliable passer, or he wasn't at Portsmouth. He's more reliable as a long passer, actually, so he has some passing range. He wasn't actually making that many passes either, but his dueling, his off the ball work was actually pretty good. He's one of the better aerial dueling midfielders in the championship. He was actually getting into a lot of duels, and for me, that amount of duels contested is probably one of the biggest things in this midfield role. If someone can contest a lot of duels whilst being technically of the level, then I'm really happy with that. And kind of because I'm seeing that at championship level in his data, I'm sort of a mind to keep him around, just because if he's serviceable, if he can do a job, it's one less thing to try and solve this summer. It's it's less money to try or to have to depart with, and we know we don't have much of that at the minute to play with. So yeah, I'm sort of leaning towards he has a role to play now, because we know he can do the dirty work, or at least his data suggests he can do the dirty work, and his performances in the championship suggest he can do that, and then he can sort of contribute in other ways as well. Maybe being around a better quality squad with better players. You might see a raise in the level of his on the ball stuff. You might see him become a little bit more accurate because he's got more players to associate with. He's got better movement around him to create a free option for him to pass to, and then maybe you start to see him find passes between the lines. So sometimes these environmental changes can really be what helps a player kick on. I mean, very often actually it is that environmental change that can help a player really kick on. So at minimum, want to see him during pre-season. But I think tentatively I would keep him in the squad for next year.
Nice. I think I could probably land there. I think definitely pre-season. I wouldn't be looking at offers necessarily now before Potter's had a chance to look at him. And I think even more so given Potter himself has spoken about how he wants him to sort of be involved, at least in pre-season. But I think he intimated that he'd be sticking around and be a part of the squad, which is exciting to hear about a West Ham Academy prospect. And I also agree. I think if he's happy if he backs himself to take that Andy Irvine position in the squad as the guy that comes on and gets minutes here and there, but hopefully can impress in those minutes and then those minutes increase. If he's happy to take that role, I'm all for it. It's just whether he sees himself as being able to go and, I don't know, compete in the playoffs and the Championship and that sort of thing, and whether he thinks that's better for him. And if that's what he thinks, then I'd be happy to sort of sanction that as well. I think my appetite to keep him round would increase if one of Ward-Prowse or Souček goes. But as we said on that previous podcast where we discussed about which of the players we expect to stay and go, I think both of us were in favour of keeping both Ward-Prowse and Souček, but bringing in two midfielders to start ahead of them both, which then I'm like, okay, you are the fifth choice to Freddie Potts. But like you say, there's cup competitions, there's 5 subs, there's minutes to come off, and in Souček, Freddie Potts and Ward-Prowse, if they're your 3 central midfield sub options, they're all very different. So you could see them actually getting a fairly decent spread of minutes, because in certain games you might want what Potts offers more so than what Souček or what Ward-Prowse offers. So yeah, I feel like, there probably is a squad place for him. I just feel bad that he's probably not the answer to our midfield issues, as much as I would love him to be. Someone else who probably isn't the answer to our midfield issues yet, but could be in the future based on his data, is Patrick Kelly, who has been out on loan in League 2 with Doncaster. And having had a look at his data, yes, it's at League 2, but yes, he's also young. Unbelievable progressive carries through the middle of the park.
He's just been running forward. He's just been running forward, holding W.
That's it. Apparently. So, ball carrier in central areas, an average forward passer, well above average for XG and XA, shots created, and bang average jeweler by the looks of it, which for someone of his age kind of interests me.
Yeah, not someone that I've caught minutes of, I'll be honest. But yeah, I think the data actually looks very good. He's almost sort of like the forgotten man in the West Ham Academy. I think he's 20, so he's actually a little bit ahead of like an Orford who's 19 or 18 at the minute, which is I think maybe why he's considered sort of the forgotten man, or is the forgotten man, just because he's sort of behind where Orford is. But yeah, it seems like he's had a really good sort of attacking midfield season from what I can see anyway, or at least as like a box crashing central midfielder number 8. I guess with him, because I haven't really seen any minutes, I'm not exactly sure what I would do with him. Whether it's he's someone that his race is run and it's time to sell, or it's worth doing another loan, because it does seem like he's sort of outperformed the level to a certain extent for his XA and XG to be that high. Usually kind of indicates a player is playing quite well if they're not just a striker. So it's I imagine he's someone that we'll see go back on loan. But can't be certain, if I'm honest.
No, I think again I'd be lying if I sat here and told you I'd watched all of Patrick Kelly's minutes for Doncaster. Frankly, I don't have enough time, as much as I appreciate the bloke. But yeah, no, I think having looked purely at the data, it looks like it should be a loan away, right? He's done everything he can in League 2. Shout about that to League 1 and Championship clubs and see if anyone bites. And then you assess again next summer, I think. If not, I guess you just see what happens. He could probably still contribute at PL2 for another year and then see how he handles that level. But yeah, I think a loan, another loan out makes sense. Even if it just means flipping him next summer to a club that's slightly higher up the food chain and therefore able to pay us a slightly higher fee than a League 2 club might this summer. And I think we'll leave it there for this section, because I think the next section holds some of the more exciting talents. Obviously, one George Earthy and one Callum Marshall, who have been both of them in inspired form out on loan this season. Before we do that, though, I should mention Mohamadou Kanté, who has played 59 minutes for Paris FC in Ligue 2. That's probably as much of an update as either of us can give you on that one. So
yeah, I know a lot of people have wanted sort of an update on Kanté and what he's been doing. So I went and looked in the data, and unfortunately, yeah, he's not really played much. Yeah, so start of this, just to sort of explain his season, start of the season until game week 24, he didn't play a minute at all, and then he's maybe got a run of like 5 or 6 games where he literally gets a minute or two, and then his longest appearance was on the penultimate day of the season, where he got a whopping 32 minutes off the bench. So it's not been a fruitful year. No. Nothing at all, unfortunately. So yeah, it's not been a fruitful year for him. And to be honest, there's actually very little data out there about him on the different tools that we have. So I'm kind of excited for him to get back to the club so we can see what we're working with. Because I know there might have been some sort of off the pitch or structural issues with what was going on at Paris FC that meant he was not playing. So I'm to be honest, I'm kind of keen to see the player that we do have on our hands.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. Yeah, was it a Stuyton one? Did it come under his?
I think so. Yeah,
tenure.
It was last summer.
Yeah, and
because the rumor went round that we were signing Kanté, and I assume it was lost in translation that it was Mohamadou Kanté, and not N'Golo Kanté, who we were linked with in the press a lot last year.
One would assume. But yeah, I mean, think what you want of Stuyton. He picked up a lot of good young players during his time at Leverkusen on the cheap. Certainly one Florian Wirtz, who I believe he picked up when he was 16 for 500k, and he's just been sold for 130 million. So not a bad bit of profiling. I'm not saying I expect Mohamadou Kanté to be the next Florian Wirtz, but that would be nice. But the next Florian Wirtz could be George Earthy, and we'll come and talk to him in the next section. Okay, as promised, the next Florian Wirtz, George Earthy. Disclaimer, definitely not the next Florian Wirtz, but a good player in his own right. I mean, no, the similarities just aren't there, are they, realistically? I was trying to think of... I guess the one similarity could be that, positionally, if I was going to buy Florian Wirtz for West Ham now, and if I was going to play George Earthy in the starting 11, they'd probably both play in the same position in this system. I think you're probably playing them as the left point of a box midfield, so that sort of left 10 wing fielder type role. And George Earthy has played a reasonable amount of minutes, I think just over 1,500 minutes for Bristol City. He won, was it the Fans Player of the Year? Something like that.
Young Player of the Year.
There you go. Contributed a lot when he was on. And I am going to set my stall out and say that of all the players that have been out on loan, Earthy is the one that I'm most excited about. And Earthy is the one that I think is most ready to contribute next season. In part because of his level, and also in part because I think he is probably the best served by Graham Potter than any of the Loanees, because I think Potter will be able to use him in a number of ways, and Earthy is able to play in a handful of positions. So I think it's a sort of nice stylistic fit. Are you as excited as I am, or do you think another loan is the right move?
I agree with some of the things you said, for sure. I think he's probably technically the furthest ahead of all the young players. I think he's the most like possessionally comfortable, and probably the most confident as well. Just from what we saw from him at the end of last season and at Bristol this year, he seems to be very comfortable being on the ball and receiving the ball under pressure. I think one of the big things that he did do for Bristol City was kind of get in that left pocket and then carry the ball forward. But I think the one thing that I was really hoping that would come out of this season for George Earthy is sort of a a high level of creativity. So we're seeing him generate a lot of chances for teammates, and that's not really what we've got out of him. And bear in mind as well, Bristol City play the 3-4-3 most of the time. So that those tips of the box, those positions do exist, and that's what Earthy has generally played for Bristol City. But his creative data is not eye-catching at all. He's in the 23rd percentile for XA, 28th percentile for the amount of shots that he generates for teammates, which kind of leads me to probably concluding that he needs another loan. I think more football in the Championship, maybe for I mean, Bristol City were in the playoffs, so I'm not trying to disparage Bristol City at all. But I think if you can get a higher end Championship loan, somewhere where a team will be quite ball dominant in almost every game, and he can play a very similar role to what he played at Bristol City, it might be beneficial for him. Just so we can see if that creative, and more than anything, beneficial for us, because we need to see if that creative upside is there. Because if the creative upside is not there, we're maybe looking at a slightly different type of player to the player that we thought we were getting. And then we need to evaluate from there. I also just worry a little bit about his physicality in the Premier League. He is probably the least physically prepared, even though he's technically at the highest level. But yeah, I think a Championship loan is probably right. Maybe even lower Premier League, but I just think Championship is probably a little bit better, because if that creative spark is in there, it will really explode in the Championship, and that'll do a lot for his confidence. Whereas I don't think that you can rely, even from one of the promoted teams, that he'll get regular starts or regular minutes, just because he's not proven. But yeah, I think a loan. He definitely has a role to play at some point, but a loan for now works well.
I hear you. I think the difficulty is, isn't it? It's so difficult to place players in the Championship now because of the sort of gulf in quality, right? It's like, I want him to go and play for a team that would be competing in the Championship. Great. So many of those teams now have so much money and such good players that it's actually difficult for someone like Earthy to even break in, which I think Bristol was a good fit. They obviously had a bad end to the season, which isn't necessarily his fault at all. But yeah, it's hard to know now who or where to send him to, because chances are they've probably got a really good player. I'd maybe be keeping an eye on where someone like Michael Carrick ends up now that he's left Borough, and maybe think of it that way, like who managerially could teach him a lot. I suppose Lampard's down there as well with Coventry, albeit playing a different system to Potter, but someone who has worked really well with young players, and someone who you would think George Earthy could probably learn a lot from, whether you like him or loathe him as a West Ham fan. He certainly was a very, very, very good attacking midfielder that could teach someone like Earthy a lot, and we've seen that almost instantaneously with Jack Rodoni at Coventry, who under Lampard has been, quite frankly, a freak. But as you raised, I believe Jack Rodoni is also quite a physically imposing character. I think he's like 6 foot plus, which George Earthy certainly isn't, and I think that will always be my biggest concern. It's like, will George Earthy be able to raise his technical floor so high that his physical ceiling doesn't diminish the level that he's able to reach? What a terribly pompous way to say what I wanted to say. But hey, it makes sense. Yeah, okay. Maybe you've convinced me on another loan. The only thing I was thinking is that obviously if Paquetá goes, if Kudus goes, you've got Bowen in that starting right-hand side slot. You've got Somerville presumably starting in that left-hand spot. Guilherme, who can play across both. And then Earthy maybe picking up the minutes that are left. I suppose the issue is, depending on A, how comfortable we are with Somerville being that starter, but also B, when Somerville's actually going to be fit, are we then forced into going and buying a left 10 anyway this summer because Paquetá's gone, Kudus is gone, and you're not 100% sure if you can rely on Somerville? Then you're probably going, actually, yeah, we probably do need to go and buy someone. And then the minutes for Earthy reduce again, right? So maybe a loan is the right option, and then you work out where you're at the following season. But I probably wouldn't be against him hanging around the squad and picking up minutes here and there if he shows that he can contribute within the system in pre-season. Callum Marshall, I'm sort of a bit more set on what I would do with him. Again, had a really good season at Huddersfield. Also won an award. Maybe that was fans player. 10 goals, 4 assists in 2,800-ish minutes. Really solid contribution from another player, actually, who I will say I had my doubts over regarding their physicality. I think his tenacity is off the charts. I think every time I've watched him, he's looked pretty aggressive in the press. But he's obviously not a big forward. He's not going to sort of be he's never going to be the sort of focal point number 9. But in a era that seems to be pivoting back towards the sort of false 9 link-up striker, with PSG obviously winning the Champions League, playing that way, and usually that's quite a good marker of tactical trends and what's to come as teams try and replicate what success looks like at the moment. Potentially there is a future for him, but given that he's impressed out on loan at League One with Huddersfield, I think then I just go, okay, right, let's test him out at Championship level, because I think the leap from League One to Premier League contributor is huge. But I think if you can then go and scale this up at the next level above and maintain that level of performance, I then have more confidence in your ability to then scale the Championship performance up to the Premier League, because you're kind of managing the ascent, so to speak. You're not just chucking them in and then potentially increasing the risk of drowning.
Yeah, I also just don't know if he's the right profile to lead the line. I just don't know if he fits what we need. I'm pretty sure at Huddersfield he was playing in a 2. And he's not... like, there's certain things I like in his profile. He's actually seemed to be quite a creative striker, so creates a lot of shots for teammates, shots of good quality as well. But in a Potter system, he's not... I don't think anyway he's the right guy, at least not yet, to lead the line. Mainly from a physical perspective. I know physicality isn't everything for Potter, but it still is a massive factor in the Premier League. And I don't think he, to me anyway, from what I've seen, he doesn't seem like the kind of player that leads the line on their own. And therefore he would be sort of like off the right wing in a Bowen type role, where he's a goal focused sort of winger. Do we really have that role in the squad right now? No. So I don't think that he would. There's any. I don't think there's any logic to keep him at the club this season, and letting him progress through the Championship and increase his own value is probably the best thing to do. Just because he wouldn't get minutes here, I don't think. Stylistically and how far down in the pecking order he is, I just think it would be poor form from or poor for everyone involved.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I think Championship loan is absolutely the right move. I also think, like, even if we read into some of the links of players we've been supposedly looking at for that striker role, Kvistgaarden is the one that keeps coming to mind. Like, he's not big. He's 5'8", right? But he's really, really, really got such a high technical floor. Like, he's so secure in possession. He's so good at being able to create shots for himself by taking on his man or by taking a smart touch. And when you look at the data around Marshall, sure, he's been above average sort of XG contributor, definitely above average XA contributor, but in terms of his take on percentage, 21st percentile, so it's the bottom 25% of players, below average in terms of ball security as well with his short passing. So I think, sure, okay, maybe if he had the sort of technical floor of someone like a Kvistgaarden, then you could see how that steps in and he becomes a sort of false 90 type. But the fact I've not seen that level of ball security at League One level does not fill me with confidence just yet about how he would translate and sort of compensate for those physical shortcomings. So yeah, let him take the step up to the Championship. I'm sure there'll be plenty of interest given how good he was for Huddersfield last season, and then assess next summer, because if he can bang 10 plus goals in the Championship, even if there's not a future at West Ham, you can sell him to someone. And he can just become one of those players that is a really positive EFL contributor, and potentially be a late bloomer as well. But I just don't think the timelines line up for us. other players, just before we wrap up, that have been on loan. Maxwel Cornet, sell if at all possible, I assume, just did not work. There was one moment the other day when I was on Football Manager and I was thinking, I wonder if Maxwel Cornet could be repurposed into that left wing back role. I think we saw him do it a bit at Lyon when he was out on loan there all those years ago before he was even with us.
Burnley as well. He had a good run at Burnley as a left wing back.
Yeah, and like whilst in principle, there is a very slim possibility that could happen. I think we're many seasons removed from that version of Maxwel Cornet, right? So yeah. I just think if Genoa can find the money, then basically just say like we'll let you have him. Just scramble together what you've got, and we'll take it and reinvest it elsewhere. And Gideon Kodua, I just don't think his future is at West Ham, as sad as that is, for someone who's done pretty well through the academy. I suppose the only potential positive for him is that he's quite versatile in terms of position. I think he could probably do that right wing back slot and provide a level of cover to Wan-Bissaka, but I think the drop off would be so significant that you'd just be kind of screwing yourself. And given that that's the case, and Vladimir Soval's left, we're going to have to go and buy a right back from somewhere, and then where does Kodua fit? So I think you probably just try and move him on if you can, but I'm happy to hear whether you love Cornet or Kodua enough to argue against me.
No, yeah, I think you're right on both counts. Kodua, just over 300 minutes at League One level, struggling to get in the team. I think kind of leaves the writing on the wall for him. And then Cornet, I think that we've probably been trying to sell him for a little while, and it's just been quite a difficult task, because how do you sell someone that actually is not often in the condition to play football? And I'm not saying that's his fault at all. I know there's been a lot going on. Or rumoured going on off the pitch with him. But yeah, I think for both of those guys, there's probably not a spot in the attack. They're just not of the level, either of them, to be honest.
Yep, I think you're right. And then, sorry, developed a cough in the last minute. But the only other player to mention, or that we wanted to mention, was Joshua Ajala, who has obviously been tearing up in the academy for West Ham. And I think we're both in agreement that trying to find a suitable loan move for him next season would be a good step for his development. I feel like that feels like the right move. But yeah, Kodua and Cornet move on. I just can't get how do you solve a problem like Maria out of my head now. But with Kodua or Ajala or Maxwell, all of the three people that we've just discussed would fit onto that. Probably none of them credible enough to be worthwhile titles, though. I don't think they would bring in the traction that we're looking for. So we'll probably just have to see if anyone makes it to the end for that joke. But yeah, thanks everyone. That's a wrap. That's the loan roundup. Really starting to develop a much clearer picture now of what the squad looks like if we were in charge, and sort of how many squad places there are to fill. So yeah, I thank you all for listening, and please stay tuned for lots and lots of transfer content as the summer goes on. But until then, yeah, we'll see you there, and we'll see you all on the Patreon, hopefully. Bye.